For nearly 50 years, the US and Soviet Union fought each other, not in open warfare, but in every other way, politically, economically, ideologically, covertly, and through proxies, hence why we call it the Cold War. Now, we have almost certainly entered into another one, this time between the US and China. The US won the last one, and the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So can the US win, or at least survive the next one? But first, our sponsor, NordVPN. You've heard you need a VPN a million times, and there's a reason for that. You gotta protect yourself online. It's easy to ignore, since it isn't a physical thing that you can see. But cybercrime is a multi-trillion-dollar a year industry. And it's not always some quick one-off where you just cancel your card if it's stolen. They have your data, they keep it, and they use it against you without you even knowing. Whether it's identity theft, or large corporations, or even governments collecting your data, all your actions online are logged and tracked. And that's why VPNs are important. It keeps you anonymous online. It's one of the best ways to keep that from happening. And NordVPN is the best, winning the 2020 Best VPN Award and constantly recommended by tech experts. So go down, use my link in the description, and get protected. With it, you get 68% off. And right now, every purchase of a 2-year plan will get you 1 additional month for free and a surprised gift. Go to nordvpn.org/covertcabal and use our coupon code COVERTCABAL at checkout. One of the defining factors of the last Cold War was nuclear weapons. A race to see who could build the most, the fastest, the longest range, the largest, or even at times the smallest. While the Cold War has ended, that buildup of nuclear weapons didn't just disappear. Russia, the main and largest successor state of the Soviet Union, controls more nuclear weapons than the rest of the world combined, not counting the US. It also still maintains a massive conventional military, but there really seems no path forward right now for Russia to ever become another global superpower like the Soviet Union. A lot of their military industry is funded by export sales, like selling S-300s, MiGs and Sukhoi fighters, and the like to other nations. China has always been a real big customer for Russia, but not only has China began shifting to domestically made weapons, they have also began exporting them as well, directly competing against Russia. Now this doesn't mean Russia is going to go away, but China is quickly surpassing them. So the next Cold War, which we are arguably already seeing, will be China and the US. From a military perspective, the US currently has the advantage, but that lead has been rapidly diminishing. 20 years ago, there was little doubt that the US could easily have won, but not so much anymore. So what about in another 20 years? There is already talk about how China has surpassed the US in the number of naval ships, air defenses, and missiles. And China's position geographically presents an advantage here. They only border the Pacific Ocean, and therefore can focus their entire navy there, where the US is spread across the Pacific and the Atlantic, as well as often involved in the Middle East. This also hurts them though. Their only sea route out into the rest of the world has to go through a whole bunch of countries that they aren't exactly friendly with. In fact, China is nearly surrounded by countries that could be labeled as enemies in the event of a war. South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Vietnam really limit their access into the rest of the Pacific, along with India, who is pretty anti-Chinese, along its land border. And a lot of those countries have some pretty powerful militaries themselves. This gives the US and any allies a big advantage of being within quick striking range of any targets inside of China. If a war broke out, China's homeland is well within range of thousands of cruise missiles that could take out vital command and control, military bases, and vital industry in eastern China. Whereas, at least for the US, it sits far away in the relative safety of nearly 10,000 kilometers which would need to be transversed. If we are talking strictly conventional war, which I think is the only conversation really worth having, as any nuclear weapons would just be too devastating to each side to matter, the US mainland would be decently safe, enabling the ability to continue wartime production, industry to run, and civilian life to not be as affected, similar in a way to what happened in World War II with the US compared to, say, the UK or Soviet Union, who were right on the front lines. China would really have a difficult fight to get to the US mainland through the countries previously mentioned, then through US bases in the Pacific Ocean as well, like Guam. But a major change from World War II has been the range and speed of modern weapons. A bomber from that era had a fraction of the range and speed of current bombers. Warships had to get right up and close with any target before they really could have any effect, where now they have 1,000+ kilometer range cruise missiles that can take out targets that they can't even see. And this is the one area China has really been growing rapidly. They are quickly building up their own forces with incredible range, such as conventionally armed ballistic missiles and their own land attack cruise missiles, similar to Tomahawk, on board their own naval ships. The US, on the other hand, really hasn't faced any real naval threat in over 30 years. This has resulted in a noticeable lack in innovation and improvements in their ability to fight a real navy. We already are seeing the US recognize this, but it's going to take some time to build up new capabilities. Things like LRASM, anti-ship capable Tomahawk, and eventually even land-based anti-ship ballistic missiles are in the works. But it will be several years before they're really deployed in the numbers to really matter. I've made a video on this, which you can see in the top right, so I won't go into too much detail, but China would really have a difficult time branching out. Although again, that level of difficulty is really decreasing as they continue to advance in terms of military strength. One major ally China might have is Russia. Russia would give them a major boost, as its proximity to the rest of Europe, the Arctic, and a massive military of its own would really strain US and ally forces in a war. However, relations between the two have never really been perfect. During the 1950s, the Soviet Union and China were allies. That changed pretty quickly, and by the 1960s they were virtually enemies. They even had several small border skirmishes. Later on, the Soviet Union even viewed China as much of a threat to it as the US. Some argue even more due to their long shared border. Again, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they've grown closer. But there remain some issues which could cause another split, such as China copying Russian designs without permission, which it then sells to other countries, competing directly against Russia. But we don't know how that relationship will play out. Russia has made a lot of money selling military equipment to China, but now that China can produce its own and doesn't need Russia anymore, that could change. The interesting thing is that there are a lot of differences between the two Cold Wars. This time, nuclear weapons aren't as front and center. China doesn't have many, but knows that it has enough to deter the US, which is really all it needs. The concept of deterrence, or mutually assured destruction, has been clearly defined and understood after decades of its threat. In the early days of the Cold War, nuclear weapons weren't viewed the same as they are now. They were almost treated just like big bombs, which could be used to help win a war. Now, after knowing the complete destruction they bring in terms of radiation, massive loss of civilian life, and the fact that both sides would lose in the event of their use, we have a different understanding of them. But a direct military conflict is only a small part of a wider Cold War. Let's not forget that the last one never saw US and Soviet forces fight each other directly in open conflict. A lot of it went on behind the scenes. Proxy wars were huge. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and countless others were seen during the last Cold War. This time likely won't be any different. China advancing further into the South China Sea with artificial islands has caused many small skirmishes with neighboring countries. This is one area the US could covertly intervene, or China do so in places where the US is currently fighting, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, etc. Espionage is a real interesting one. During the last Cold War, most intelligence was gained through human intelligence, having actual human sources steal files or defect and reveal the names of other spies. You needed sources in high-ranking positions, like Aldrich Ames, who revealed dozens and dozens of CIA agents and sources to the Soviet KGB, along with over 100 ongoing US intelligence operations. Nowadays, more can be learned electronically. Computer hacking and other cyber warfare methods can reveal anything and everything, like entire blueprints of the most advanced stealth fighters, or lists of every single last source and enemy spy working in your country. So much more can be gained through espionage than ever before, and can often be done from the safety of never leaving your own country. Economic and political issues were the most obvious factor in the last Cold War, but they don't dominate as clearly this time. China is technically a communist country, but it doesn't have any overt desire to spread socialism across the world like the Soviet Union did. In a way, it's a more simple confrontation, without each side excusing their actions in the sake of the greater good for their own political or economic system, like what we saw in the last Cold War. Each side will obviously still try to portray themselves as the victim, as there's great power in being a victim, as you gain supporters who come to your aid. But it's still just all power and control, which, for the US at least, makes it more difficult to rally behind. You can't as easily have another Red Scare, for example, to motivate people when China isn't really fighting for any revolution. Without any clear existential threat, most people just don't care. So in that regard, I think the US will have a much more difficult time in this Cold War. Also, unlike the last Cold War, there is massive trading going on between the two countries. The US imports several $100 billion worth of goods from China every year. This places a real dependence on each other, as the US would suffer as its economy highly relies on those imports, and China really needs that money to sustain its own economy. The US is by far the largest trading partner of China, so any disturbance there will have a real impact. Recently, so-called trade wars, tariffs, and political debate in the US regarding China could see a shift away from relying on China so much. A lot will be determined by who can win over and influence other countries. We are seeing both sides trying to keep their allies and gain new ones. Europe, for example, Africa, and the Middle East are all potential battlegrounds to gain power and control over economically. China could try, and likely is trying, to influence politics in neighboring countries as well. If they can get on better terms with one of those countries mentioned earlier, it could give it access out into the rest of the Pacific and elsewhere. However, China has problems of its own as well, like the fact that their population is virtually cut off from the majority of the internet. The website you are watching this on, YouTube, is blocked, for example. They have some serious restrictions on freedom there, which was also a factor in the last Cold War with the Soviet Union, which certainly hurt them in the long run. But either way, we are in it. It is here. The new Cold War has started, and likely won't end anytime soon. Neither side is backing down. China wants to rise into a global superpower, and the US wants to maintain its position on top. Just hopefully, like the last one, it can end peacefully, without starting World War III.